Okay, I asked you yesterday to prepare for this because I watched The Young Rock here this past Tuesday night, the #1 sitcom on NBC that about twice as many people watch any of the wrestling programs. And there was a bunch of wrestling on this Young Rock program this past week, Brian, I'll have you know, because they focused on the memorable event in 1985 when Leah Maivia, actually she was going through her extortion trial out there on the island and had handed the business over to family, and specifically in the Young Rock episodes, it's been Atta, Rock's mother.
Oh, no Uncle Lars Anderson on this episode?
Lars Anderson, for some reason, is not even a character in this program. So basically, yeah.
I'm sorry. If you know anything about history, it's all so ridiculous.
I know, but basically what has happened on Young Rock, the television program, is that because Leah Maivia, Peter Maivia's wife, Rock's grandmother, is undergoing the extortion trial in Hawaii because of the outlaw promoter, that things were said and she was wiretapped and blah, blah, blah. But so she has handed off the reins, the booking, to the Rock's mother, Atta, her daughter. And Atta is several times in this program is seen watching the matches and saying, "Oh, all my storylines are coming together," which would have been a phrase that in 1985, exactly 0 people in the wrestling business would have ever uttered those words. If she had been entrusted with the book instead of the aforementioned Lars Anderson, who appears nowhere in this program, do your research, folks. She would have said, "Hey, the angle's clicking," or "the people are with so-and-so, whoever the babyface is," or "the heel so-and-so's got a ton of heat." I think, whatever, but no, my storylines are all coming together. But anyway, the Backyard Brawl BQ is the name of the Aloha Stadium show in 1985 that Leah Maivia promotes with the help of her booker daughter, Atta. And the show focuses on all the guys who are in town and they have the climactic matches. And then something happens with Rocky Johnson to further the story that they've been telling on Young Rock, where there's problems between him and Tony Atlas. I know. Brian, you've got the Aloha. Now, this actually happened, folks. The Polynesian Pro Wrestling. Well, no, there was a show. Now, hold on.
There was a show that happened. Nothing on that show happened.
Listen to the words that are going to come out of my mouth. There was a show that Polynesian Pro Wrestling promoted at Aloha Stadium in Hawaii in 1985. However, there were significant differences between what actually happened and what was portrayed on Young Rock, and I thought it might be an exercise here for us in entertainment value if, Brian, you have the exact details on what actually happened over there.
I do, and this is a pretty legendary show. I mean, you've heard about it before.
Yes, and I've got the notes on what Young Rock told us happened. Well, so I thought we'd compare the two, see where we went sideways and where we were on the straight and narrow.
The actual name of the event was A Hot Summer Night, the 85 World Invitational Wrestling Spectacular, not Backyard Brawlbarbecue or whatever.
Well, that's the first thing. Now, Polynesian Pro Wrestling did have a television program on the air in Hawaii at that time. And it also, for a limited period of time, was at the Financial News Network.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
There was a cable system in the 80s called the Financial News Network. And for some reason, I don't know if you even know, because I never heard it. Okay, why did they air Polynesian Pro Wrestling on the Financial News Network with a crawl at the bottom of the screen with the stock market information while we're watching the wrestling.
The guy who ran the network was a wrestling fan, and he had Danny Wolf working for him, and Danny was the one who put together the deal to get Continental on the network, remember, the famous story was they were airing Memphis Wrestling, and the reason they stopped airing Memphis Wrestling was Jerry Jarrett insisted on a fishing show. So they got rid of Memphis Wrestling. But Polynesian Pro Wrestling, that's the way people in the States were able to see, like the Ripper Collins interview with Jimmy Snuka and Jerry Lawler wrestling over there, because it aired in the States.
Well, but did you know that the hosts of the television show were Mean Gene Okerlund and Pat Patterson?
No, I did not know that. I believe it would have been Ripper Collins and maybe Ripper Collins.
Well, Mean Gene and Pat Patterson were doing it on the Young Rock. And
wait, so they had an actor play Pat Patterson on the show?
Oh yeah, Pat's been in. He looks more like Larry Sharpe than he does Pat Patterson. To be honest with you, he's trying to do a French Canadian accent, and that ain't working out either. But if they ever do a Larry Sharpe biopic, I promise you, the guy that's playing Pat Patterson on Young Rock needs to play the part.
Well, if you're going to do a Larry Sharpe biopic, I think the most important thing would be the voice. Kind of like the, hey. Like, I don't know how to do it exactly, but it was like a whiny Jersey voice.
It was like a whiny Jersey Jerry Lewis.
Hey, Bam Bam, where's my money? I can't do it exactly. But here's the card, Jim.
Well, hold on now.
Okay.
Before we go into the card, did you know, Brian, that this show sold out Aloha Stadium? 50,000 people were at this event. Did you know that?
I did not know that, no.
How many people were really at this event?
Well, no one's exactly sure. Wikipedia apparently has multiple sources, because they're sourced here. It actually has them. It's somewhere between 12,553 and 19,955. Somewhere in that range was the actual attendance.
And I had heard at the time, being in the business, hey, they just drew 15,000 people in Honolulu. So it's in that range.
And apparently it was the first Hawaiian show to have a $100,000 gate.
That's correct, because think about this. Was that the first show that was ever run at Aloha Stadium?
I'm not sure.
I believe it may have been, and the indoor buildings in any of them in Honolulu or anywhere else didn't seat that many people, so that was the biggest crowd in the history of Hawaii wrestling. They had done, major repeat business in the indoor building that seated, 7,000 or 8,000, over the territory days, especially, in the golden era of Hawaiian wrestling. But it's not a big population center, and they'd never done and never did and never will do 50,000 people for any wrestling event in Hawaii. But that was the crowd. I just want to give you've got I'll give you the card that was on Young Rock here in a second, but I'm going to mention some names. And when I mention a name, just tell me if they were really on the show or not. Can you do that for me?
I can do that.
Hillbilly Jim.
No Hillbilly Jim, no.
Iron Sheik.
I'm just trying to scan through this real quick because there's a lot of names here. No Iron Sheik.
Big John Studd.
No Big John Studd.
Randy Macho Man Savage.
No Randy Macho Man Savage. Once again, this is August 3rd, 1985. No Randy Savage.
Miss Elizabeth.
Certainly no Miss Elizabeth.
Sergeant Slaughter.
No Sergeant Slaughter.
Jake the Snake Roberts.
No Jake the Snake Roberts.
Bill Watts
wasn't going to give you time off to go to Hawaii. No.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't see Lou Albano here. Of course,
George the Animal Steele.
Certainly no George Steele, no.
Nikolai Volkov.
No Nikolai.
Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Boy, they just went with the whole WWE locker room. No Piper.
Mr. Fuji.
I don't see Fuji listed here, although he's from Hawaii, so we're getting closer.
Ricky Steamboat.
I don't see Ricky Steamboat on the card either.
Greg Valentine.
There's no Greg Valentine.
Tony Atlas.
No Tony Atlas.
Rocky Johnson.
Rocky Johnson is on the card.
Exactly. And now we're getting down to the meat of the matter. And Afa and Sika, the Wild Samoans.
Actually, they're not on the card either.
They weren't on the card.
No. Now, I did pull up the next year's event, because that's another story in and of itself. Let me just see if Afa and Sika are at least on that one. No, they're not on that one either.
So basically, all the people whose names I just read off were hanging out in the locker room at the backyard barbecue. And they actually, they had an angle on the local news where Sergeant Slaughter is on the beach and barbecued Jake's snake as a promotion. One of the things that Atta was saying, oh, my storylines are coming together.
Maybe they're confused because the opening match featured the Cobra.
George Takano?
George Takano, the Cobra. So Cobra,
Boom.
Snake. There you go.
Who says I don't know my Japanese wrestling? So also, did you know, Brian, that at the stadium show, Leah Maivia talked to the locker room and told them, and of course they'd already gotten phone calls, most of them earlier that day, from Vince McMahon telling them about a big event called WrestleMania coming up on pay-per-view, which didn't exist in 1985. And it's going to be big. What date was the Aloha Stadium show?
This was August 3rd, 1985.
So news travels slow when it's going out west with the time zones, because WrestleMania in 1985, the first one was in March, and this is August, and they just got the phone call.
Must have been that Tony Atlas.
That's the thing, because Rocky Johnson didn't get a phone call about WrestleMania, and he's mad and he's upset at Tony Atlas, but they portrayed in this. Well, let me give you what actually happened. And they did a nice montage of the action to Ballroom Blitz by Sweet, which I love that song. But on this event, Brian, at Aloha Stadium, did you know that the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov wrestled Ric Flair and Hillbilly Jim in a tag team match?
Flair and Hillbilly Jim, there's the dream tag team I didn't know I needed.
And then also on the card was Andre the Giant against Big John Studd, Ricky Steamboat against Randy Savage, Jake Roberts against Sergeant Slaughter. Are any of these matches tripping your trigger, Brian?
Well, some of these matches were on actual WrestleManias.
Yeah.
Although not even in the same year. We never got to see Sergeant Slaughter versus Jake Roberts anywhere that I could remember during this period of time.
And finally, the main event and the crowning achievement of Atta's storylines. Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas in a steel cage against Roddy Piper and George the Animal Steel with their manager, Fred Blassie. And Tony accidentally hits Rocky with an elbow and busts him open. And Rocky walks out on Tony. And he goes in the locker room and you see him punching the lockers and everything, and he's mad. And then he gets bolt cutters, and then he comes back out and he cuts himself and breaks in the cage and saves the day. So it was all a work that never happened, actually. But that was an excuse for The Rock in current day to explain to Randall Park on an NBC situation comedy what a blade job is.
Oh my God, I didn't hear anything about that.
Well, and Randall Park goes, and Rocky he was bleeding or he was busted open or whatever, and The Rock just goes, well, you take a little sliver of razor blade and nick yourself. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but I guess that's the best thing. It's a sitcom. We didn't want to get too graphic for the kiddies. But again, it's a show about wrestling, but if it wasn't for the fact that The Rock actually is Rocky Johnson's son and Peter Maivia's grandson and blah, 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 and actually did have a history like this, you would just expect them to make shit up. But since it's about a real person's real childhood, you would think that they wouldn't make all this shit up, or at least they would hire people to play the people that were actually there.
Yeah, let me know when they get to Rocky Johnson inviting underage girls to play strip poker. That's the episode I want to see how they cover. Do you want to hear the actual card?
Stop it now. And by the way, Downtown Bruno was in the locker room at Aloha Stadium. even though they would not have met for 2 more years until Rocky went to Tennessee. But give me the card. Give me the card.
Bruno hadn't yet seen Brian Hildebrand and decided what he wanted to do with his life. Yeah. But here's the actual card. For the WWF Junior Heavyweight Championship, the Cobra defeated Superfly Tui Salinga. Seiji Sakaguchi defeated Matt Bourne. Kengo Kimura and Tatsumi Fujinami defeated Gary Fulton and Gary Lewis.
And by the way, we should jump in and say that another reason why that New Japan and Inoki's office was represented is because Hawaii was the stopping off point for guys going to Hawaii and or coming back, and the Japanese wrestlers, when they would come to the States, they would stop in Hawaii and have a vacation. And this was a big event that they wanted to be a part of. So there you had Fujinami, Takano, Kengo Kimura was highly underrated. And boy, he was a fucking guy that could go. But those are some of the top stars of New Japan in 1985 when they were, well, they're still the second biggest promotion in the world, but now it's just smaller than everything used to be.
Yeah, here's how you can get New Japan talent in the 80s. Tell Antonio Inoki we have a stadium and cameras.
Yes.
But here's the rest of the card. Jimmy Snuka defeated Iron Mike Sharp.
Yeah.
Manny Fernandez defeated Black Bart via disqualification for the National Heavyweight Championship.
Because Crockett sent people and I think Crockett was there for that first one. Everybody wanted to go to Hawaii, right?
For the AWA Light Heavyweight Championship, a time limit draw for Steve Regal versus the Mighty Milo. In a women's street fight, a.k.a. Ada was exhibiting lazy booking. Debbie Combs defeated the Fallen Angel via disqualification.
And that's because Kevin was an integral part of Polynesian pro wrestling and anything out in the Pacific Rim and etc. He loved that part of the country. And obviously Fallen Angel was Nancy Sullivan, a.k.a. Nancy Benoit.
And of course, most women's street fights don't end in disqualifications, but we'll leave that there. The Samoan connection of Farmer Boy Ipo and Leroy Brown defeated, that's the Samoan connection, Leroy Brown.
Ipo and Leroy Brown, they were working the territory at the time, such as it was. It wasn't a full-time territory anymore at that point.
They defeated the Dalton brothers, Joel and Vern the Deaton brothers, Joel and Vern Deaton.
Well, and Joel Deaton was partners with Billy Black as the Wild Bunch in the early 90s in Japan, and did a lot of was one of the Thunderfoots in Crockett and did a lot of stuff down south. So,
well, if those 8 matches haven't excited you, just wait, there's more.
There's more.
Little Kevin defeated Poncho Boy in a midget wrestling match. Richie Magnet defeated Gypsy Joe. Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA defeated the Russians of Nikita Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev. Andre the Giant, Angelo Mosca, and Steve Collins defeated King Kong Bundy, Mark Lewin, and Kevin Sullivan.
And by the way, Andre was on the Young Rock episode. He's like the only other one and they didn't even show him in the locker room and didn't have any highlights of his match, I don't think. They just, he was the one that took the Outlaw promoter out the night before of the trial and got him drunk and had "I love drugs" tattooed on his ass so that the people wouldn't believe his testimony, and Leah got off.
Well, in a singles match for the NWA Polynesian Pacific Heavyweight Championship, Lars Anderson defeated Bad News Allen to win the title.
And boy, I wonder how much Lars had to politic to get Bad News Allen Coage to put him over.
For the NWA Polynesian Pacific Tag Team Championship, the champions of the Soul Patrol, Rocky and Ricky Johnson, defeated the Dirty White Boys of Len Denton and Tony Anthony.
And you know what? Then, by the way, that reminds me, when Bruce Pritchard first told me that Rocky Johnson's son was going to get a tryout in Corpus Christi at the TV taping, he didn't say, I don't know if he said son, or the way he phrased it at first, I thought he was talking about Ricky Johnson, who was Rocky's younger brother, right? And that was legitimate too, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
who wrestled a few places briefly and never got over. And I was like, what the fuck? He's been around for years. And Bruce like, no, he's only 20 something. He just came back from football. Oh, it's a different guy. Okay. But the Soul Patrol was in the WWF was Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas, but Tony didn't go to the Aloha Stadium show because he was still working for Vince at that time, right?
He was, and there were some other people who were working for Vince, but also Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson hated each other.
And they hated each other. Yeah, and they made fun of Atlas's foot situation on this program also, when he was telling young Rock to keep an eye out for women's feet. But the story they're telling that Rocky Johnson got on the outs with Vince is because he took a booking in Saudi Arabia or something for another promoter and didn't tell Vince or whatever the case. But at any rate, continue with this card.
Yeah, 2 more matches. Antonio Inoki went to a double count out with Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
That was a big match in 85, obviously.
That's a big match anytime.
And in the main event for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, Ric Flair went to a double disqualification with CV Afi.
And boy, you can tell that Lars Anderson was a lazy booker by that point because they couldn't get a finish out of Inoki and Brody. I can understand.
Yeah, that was them, not the booker. That was Inoki and Brody not being able to get a finish.
Yeah, they're that's one of those matches where you have to put up with the fact that you're going to have no finish if you want to make it. But they couldn't beat CV Afi in Honolulu with Ric Flair with the NWA title on the line, or well, I guess they couldn't do an hour Broadway. They already had 15 matches. What time did that stadium show start?
I do not have a time for the start of the event here.
I'm wondering if that's an afternoon show.
Yeah, I've seen the poster.
Oh, yeah. When I first got to Crockett and we started doing, even though we were living in Georgia, I would have to come up to Charlotte for the promo day once a week, right? And they were doing promos. Flair and Dusty and Magnum, those guys that were going out, were doing promos for that show to send out for their television at Crockett's offices. And they kept reading all these matches. I was like, what the fuck? And it was an attempt to, because everybody else was getting hot and they had access to Crockett's guys, their own guys, Inoki's top guys, and Kevin Sullivan, Mark Lloyd, guys that are independents. So they said, why not? But I've got to think that even though they had somewhere north or south of 15,000 people, between the rental on the stadium and the payoffs and the expenses, that was, nobody retired off that show, but it certainly it certainly was better than they did the same thing. And they had to be thinking about Texas Stadium the year before too, right? And then they did the same thing Texas Stadium did. The next year they do it again, and instead of having a match that needed a stadium, that a stadium needed a match.
Well, the drop-off here was bigger than Texas Stadium. The next year they ran, again, August of 1986. They drew just under 2,000 people. The card kept changing. Here are the matches, the final main event matches as they actually transpired. Bruiser Brody and Grizzly Smith went to a no contest and a body slam challenge.
Wait a minute, Grizzly Smith?
Yep.
In 1986? I did not even know that.
August 9th, 1986.
But a body slam challenge, so they were just trying to pick each other up.
A body slam challenge went to no contest. No finish for even that.
Well, Brody wasn't going to take a slam, and Grizzly at that point couldn't.
For the NWA British Commonwealth Championship, Steve Ricard, the champion, defeated Jerry Lawler with Paula Lawler via disqualification.
And Paula was his wife at the time.
Antonio Inoki defeated Hacksaw Higgins via disqualification.
Oh, boy. Wait a minute. Now, Higgins had to be working there, so they wouldn't even beat one of their local guys with Antonio Inoki?
Well, he may have been working for New Japan at that time, and maybe they were trying to do something. Maybe. Okay. Also, Bruiser Brody, I guess they now are friends. Bruiser Brody, Grizzly Smith, and Keith Hart teamed up against the Sheik, Mark Lewin, and Prince Kamalamala. And it went to a no contest in a 6-man tag team barbed wire match.
Oh, my God.
What the fuck is that match?
Kamala Mala.
Finally, in a steel cage match for the NWA Polynesian, Pacific Heavyweight Championship, Lars Anderson defeated Superfly Tui to win the title. Why isn't Lars Anderson on the show? That would make the show more interesting. Go to the Aspen Wrestling Institute, find him, bring him back.
Well, now, when did they have the falling out there?
It was all happening right around this period of time. I think it was like 86, 87. 85, 86, 87. I mean, that was when everything kind of went up and right back down.
In 1980, when we went to Atlanta for the WFIA Wrestling Fans Convention, I think it was on Channel 36, an independent station that had just, I think, come on the air at that point. Lars had his World League Wrestling show on the air in Atlanta. And they would just show film from other places because he didn't have a promotion per se, but he was still involved with the Hawaii office then and different, independent groups around the world. And they were trying to push Steve Kid Collins as their boy wonder at that point.
He was just on this show, wasn't he? On the 85 show? Hold on.
I think he was, yeah.
It was Andre the Giant, Angelo Mosca, and Steve Collins defeated King Kong Bundy, Mark Lewin, and Kevin Sullivan. Yeah,
in 1980, he was Steve Kid Collins. I think by 85, he'd outgrown the Kid.
All right, have we outgrown?
But there you have it. Thankfully, we've got Young Rock to keep us up to date on the various major stadium shows in the history of wrestling. And I've just got to think that, the whole thing stresses me out trying to keep this thing straight. I think, and it's got to be stressing out the writers of Young Rock. If Rock is remembering these episodes from his childhood, do you think he got into some of King Curtis's magic cookies in Hawaii? And that's why he remembers all these wrestlers that were not there, that he remembers them as being there? What do you think? Is he under some spell of the legendary King Curtis, or does he need somebody to talk to, Brian, to sort through these facts from fiction and fantasy?
There's no reason you can't do both.
Well, folks, that's exactly right. There's no reason you can't do both. You can both talk to someone to separate facts from fantasy, and you can also have some of King Curtis's magic cookies. But we don't recommend those, especially if you have, I don't know, any kind of functioning brain or circulatory system. But nevertheless, if you want to talk to somebody about all these bad television programs, our friends at BetterHelp, they're the ones. They've been sponsoring our program for quite some time, and we have had numerous testimonials from many of the listeners that they have been helped or aided in some way in problems or situations they had by talking to somebody at BetterHelp. You can be burned out on life itself without even knowing it, but you can exhibit symptoms like lack of motivation, feeling helpless or trapped, detachment, fatigue, etc., watching wrestling over and over when you know it's bad for you, all those things. But burnout may not just come from work. It can come from anything in life. So BetterHelp Online Therapy, those folks want to remind you to prioritize yourself, and that talking with someone can help you figure out what's causing stress in your life. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anybody on camera. You don't have to bathe. That's always a plus. And it's more affordable than in-person therapy, lower overhead, no roof. And you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. And our listeners, the Cult of Cornette members, get 10% off their first month's services at BetterHelp.com/JCE. That's BetterHelp, HELP, BetterHelp.com/JCE. 10% off your first month's services.